actual permits, which that's not where Region 3 is. So in a sense, maybe they're even going further, but the stakeholders that I've met with, the ag stakeholders, seem to be comfortable with that process because there's more, maybe a more robust dialogue. And so what I'm looking for is something similar at Region 3, even though you're not doing what Region 5 is doing.
Right.
And
So that can inform.
right.
I'm sorry, what was that, Ms. Martin?
Well, so that can inform this. I mean, I like this, and what would help was to say, have something in there to say, should follow, should review, should, I mean, something that indicates that you'll be engaged in that process in some way,
Sure.
shape, or form. And I think Ms. D'Adamo's suggestion might actually, be even better if you have the time. I also recognize your staff constrained, but something to indicate that you'll be following that process and taking it into account in.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm flexible on it, but I'm actually comfortable with where we are. I think this conversation has been good. I personally am, but to the extent we can help make folks more comfortable, I think that's a good thing to do.
Sure. And,
Can I just add to that? I mean, I absolutely agree with both of your comments, and I would push it a little bit further in that instead of a finding, I'd like to see it as a resolve.
Oh, like a direction?
Yes.
I don't-
In terms of this state board's expectations, should we end up approving this TMDL with respect to this issue?
Yes.
Perhaps to alleviate some of your concern about that, I think one of the reasons that this TMDL has resulted in so many people here today talking about this TMDL is that it's the first TMDL for all these pyrethroids.
Right, right.
All these pyrethroids. That is why we are here today.
It's a big.
And that's why Ms. Dunham is here, and she's provided excellent comments and she's done her homework. That's no question about it. But it's probably not. Well, it's not going to be the last. It's going to be the first.
Right,
And as we have a
exactly.
new 303D list, and as we begin getting more data about pyrethroids and their effect, and again, remember that this is primarily an urban problem.
it's the
That's where we see the
biggest
problem
piece,
most
right.
augmented
Right.
is in the urban landscape, not so much agricultural landscape.
Correct.
But as that process continues, we're going to see more listings and consequently more TMDLs, and it is inevitable that all the regions are going to be dialoguing with each other, saying how do we move forward with this. That's why we're perfectly okay with this finding, because as we learn, as we develop these TMDLs in the future, we might have to modify the ones in the past.
Right,
So I
because
think
it's not a 30-year static thing. It's not intended to be. It's intended to be a planning tool to have us pointed towards protecting beneficial uses. I mean, the theory behind TMDLs is fabulous. It's interesting how much people have fought them for whom they really are their best friends to get the
Ball rolling.
appropriate, well, and also to think about putting the prevention responsibilities in the appropriate places. So
Great,
I
yes.
am a fan of them in general, but it has weight, and you're exactly right. Since this is the first one, folks are worried about it, and they obviously, in many cases, want more process or prefer more process. So
Sure.
I am okay with this. I just think if you could put in more comfort
I think
language,
Michael's
if you can
working
think of
on it.
something that it doesn't hurt,
Yeah. So
because we're all in this for the long haul in a conversation.
yeah, we have no problem with that approach because I think it's just going to be a matter of necessity.
Right.
We're going.
I think that's great. And I think to the extent, I imagine that you report back to your board, assuming that we approve this, if you could report back about what we're asking for, the stakeholder, and then also on the urban side, the follow-up, looking at a dialogue about a statewide process. I expect you'd be reporting back to them as well, and they'd probably be pleased to hear that.
Very good.
Got a suggestion, Michael?
Well, so as I understand it, and based on the sense of the board that I'm perceiving, you had two findings that were put before you and put up. Those would be new whereas clauses 8 and 9 if the board were to make a motion. And I've heard from Ms. Dodek she's interested in an actual resolved clause. And I've taken a crack at trying to incorporate what I think I'm hearing from her, and I'll bounce that off the board now. This would be a new resolved clause 3, and that's that it expects, so it follows the introductory statement that the State Water Board is resolved. The State Water Board expects the Central Coast Water Board to follow the evolving regulation of pyrethroids in the Central Valley region, comma, engage as appropriate in that process, comma, and to consider revisions consistent with whereas 8, which is one of the ones you saw up here that said the executive officer of the Central
Right.
Coast Water Board would propose revisions as appropriate, including based on the evolution in the Central Valley region.
That's a great start. It doesn't capture the stakeholder component that Board Member Giordano spoke about.
I would, here's my concern on that. I would leave it as appropriate because they don't have enough staff to go to every stakeholder meeting in the Central Valley. So I do want them to be able to follow it. I feel okay with that language. I understand, but I also don't want to require somehow that the Central Coast folks have to send people over the hill for every meeting
Right,
that
but-
happens in the Central Valley, but they need to find a way to follow it closely.
And, but I
It'd be
think.
nice
and-
to go too.
Locally,
Yes,
I
Right,
meant within
exactly.
Region
It's
3.
not going to those meetings in the Central Valley. It's making sure that when you're having conversations with your local urban and ag entities, that what's happening in the Central Valley is coming back and is, being discussed,
Fed into it, yeah.
so
I
that it's
think-
not a surprise to them in the future, too.
So I think that could fairly be addressed by adding an additional clause after the engage as appropriate in that process, comma, conduct further stakeholder processes within the Central Coast region, comma, and to consider revisions consistent with whereas 8.
Okay.
I think that worked. And Mr. Laufer emailed me this language because apparently he wants no part of the resolve that I
was trying to make
suggested
sure you're comfortable
earlier.
with it. It would be resolved, or whereas number 10 now.
Do you want to read it, please?
Be glad to.
I'm comfortable with it. This is with respect to the TST, yes.
And so we now have another whereas clause, whereas 10, that would read, the State Water Board staff is presently developing a statewide approach for toxicity that contemplates the use of the test of significant toxicity, parenthetical, TST, parenthetical, period. This statewide approach will be considered by the State Water Board at a future meeting, period. While a Central Coast Water Board technical report references the TST, comma, neither the board's approval of the Basin Plan Amendment nor the Basin Plan Amendment itself require the use of the TST, period.
Great.
Thank you. And with that, I'll prepare to move for adoption of this item with all the changes that have been read into the record.
Second.
Any more discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Thank you all for a thorough conversation and a lot of hard work. Appreciate it.
Thank you all very much.
No, thank you very much. Now we're going to move to Mr. Howard. I see Greg in the back. I don't think we're going to be able to do the stormwater update other than very briefly. It's up to you. Let's see how long this goes, but I just want to put folks on notice. I'm not going to just have a half-hour lunch break before we convene at 1 o'clock. I think we need more.
We do have one comment.
We do have a comment on. No, we have, right, but we still have to do item number 8 too. So I just don't,
Do you have one comment?
2 comment cards. You have another one. I'm just either that or we're starting the 1 o'clock one at 1:30.
Well, of course,
It's just meeting management. We cannot make hard decisions at the pace we were at yesterday.
no, I would totally agree. So
So what
the
would you
choices
suggest?
would be to have our stormwater at 1 o'clock and reconvene your hearing from yesterday at 1:30,
Okay,
or have the stormwater after you reconvene and finish your hearing from yesterday. It's up to you. I agree with you that we can't possibly do both of them and get back here at 1 o'clock.
preferences?
Is that on today? That's the next week. My suggestion is that we hear the vector permit now, go to lunch, come back at 1 o'clock, hear the stormwater first, and then move on to the
Right. That's
combination.
fine, but we will do a shorter version of the stormwater discussion than we would normally have, because that's such an important issue for us. I want to get to the commenters who have shown up today, albeit maybe a little later than they anticipated, but I do not want to make the 1 o'clock hearing slip until 2.
That's fine, that'll be up to
So
your
just, I don't want to
comments.
hurt anybody's feelings. I'm just giving a heads up to staff. They know how much we care about this issue, but we have more urgent, not more important necessarily, but more urgent issues that we have to get back to. And I do want there to be enough time at lunch for staff to be able to work on what's going to happen at 1:30 and confer with any of us if they choose to. Okay, so we are at item number 8. Great. Is there a reason why I have this opening? I'm happy to read this opening statement. It's a different nature of the permit, or Mr. Howard, you're going to start and then I'll go?
Yes, I assume it's a hearing.
It is a hearing.
Yes, so we usually have an opening statement for a hearing,
Okay.
and it's yours.
Here I go. Here's the opening statement for item number 8. Good morning. We made that right. That was a good guess. This public hearing is called to order. My name is Felicia Marcus, Chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. The purpose of this hearing is to receive oral comments on the draft amendments to the statewide vector control permit. Anyone wishing to make a statement should fill out a blue speaker's card if you've not already done so, and hand it to the clerk of the board, who is in the front of the room, over to my left. Cards are available in the back of the room, back there. When making comments, please identify yourself by name and affiliation and speak directly into the microphone. Speakers will be called in the order in which I receive the cards. If you're not sure whether you wish to speak today and want to wait to hear what others have to say before deciding, please fill out a card and mark it if necessary. This hearing is being recorded. There will not be sworn testimony. The order for presentations for this hearing will be as follows. First, staff will give a brief background on the draft vector control permit amendments, and then we'll hear comments from interested parties. Staff, there you are. Please proceed and introduce yourselves, of course.
Okay, good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Gil Vasquez. I'm with the State Water Resource Control Board in the Division of Water Quality under the MPDS unit. Today I will be presenting the vector control permit amendment, as well as the comments and our responses to these comments. To the left of me, I have my supervisor, Phil Iserina, and to the left of him is Phil Wiles. So I'm going to briefly go through the background. Oh, it's this thing working?
I'm glad you got off that opening slide. I was itching just looking.
Yeah. Okay. So before I go into the comments, I'm going to go through the history of the permit. In 2011, we reissued the vector control permit. Due to time constraints, a small list of pesticide products and active ingredients were added to the permit reissuance. This list provided a mosquito and vector control was provided by the Mosquito and Vector Control Association of California, otherwise known as MVCAC. In 2012, the vector control permit was amended. This amendment pertained to the removal of restrictive language in the permit. This removal allowed the discharges to effectively maintain their mosquito and vector control programs. And we also added a few other pesticides to the product list, but unfortunately it was still incomplete. In early 2014, the Division of Water Quality's Deputy Director amended the vector control permit as monitoring and reporting program as allowed by the permit. This amendment replaced the visual, physical, and chemical monitoring with reporting of visual observations, monitoring and reporting of application rates, reporting of non-compliant applications as well. This amendment was justified using the toxicity study funded by the State Water Board and the MVCAC, along with the annual reports from the dischargers. We received only one timely comment letter from the Bologna wetlands at the time, and these comments were specific to LA County and pertain to larvicide applications. And US EPA also has deemed that most larvicides are less toxic than adulticides. So recently, the MVCAC and the pesticide manufacturing companies have requested additional active ingredients and pesticide products be listed in the permit. The addition of the active ingredients and pesticide products will give the dischargers more flexibility in mosquito control without having to amend the permit. Cut it short, huh? Okay, so I guess I got to cut it short. All right. So the permit amendment. With this amendment, we're proposing to add 3 items to the vector control permit. The first is to add all adulticide and larvicide active ingredients that are currently registered by California Department of Pesticide Regulations, or DPR, for vector control, but are not currently listed in our permit. We previously had 8 active ingredients proposed on this amendment, and since then we've talked to California Department of Public Health, the MVCAC, as well as some regional board staff, and we've reduced it down to 2. I can go into more description a little later on. The second is to provide receiving water limitations or receiving water monitoring triggers for these active ingredients that we're proposing to add. The purpose of this is to be consistent with the active ingredients, with the active ingredient information that is already in our permit. And the third item is to include language that allows adulticides and larvicide products that are newly registered in California and that are based on active ingredients currently registered by DPR to be used for vector control without having to further amend the permit. Do you want me to keep going? Are we out of time? Or? Okay. Okay, so the state board received, here we are. The state board received 2 comment letters during our 30-day public comment period of the proposed amendment. One letter came from the Bay Area Clean Water Agencies, or BACWA, and the other came from the Clean Water Action of California. The Clean Water Action of California's comment letter echoed BACWA's comments and referred to them. So I'll be presenting the 5 comment areas and their concerns regarding the proposed amendment and our staff responses. Okay, so the first one, the first comment, modifications proposed without scientific justification. So BACWA stated that the State Water Board should identify the scientific studies or produce a staff report that documents how the amendments will not impair water quality. In our response, the State Water Board and MVCAC funded a 2011-2012 toxicity study. Based on the study, combined with the annual reports, the Deputy Director of the Division of Water Quality determined that the vector control applications do not significantly affect state water quality. Deputy Director amended the MRP, or the Monitoring and Reporting Program, replacing chemical, physical, and visual monitoring with reporting of visual observations, application rate monitoring and reporting, and report of non-compliance applications. BAC also stated that adding active ingredients is inconsistent with the Integrated Pest Management Plan, or IPM methodology. The State Board staff discussed this with California Department of Public Health and MVCAC. Vector control districts continue to use the IPM methodology. So the IPM includes public education, regarding self-protection for mosquitoes, surveillance to target control efforts in areas where needed, physical control, source reduction, biological control, mosquito fish, and chemical control. During the comment period, the State Water Board staff discussed the proposed active ingredient list with the regional board staff, CDPH, and MVCAC. Per our discussions, we concluded that 6 of the 8 active ingredients that were proposed on our amendment are rarely used and could be removed from the proposed permit amendment. These are bifenthrin, carbaryl, chlorpyrifos, cyfluthrin, cypermethrin, and diflubenzuron. The 2 active ingredients left on our list that we're proposing to add to the permit are deltamethrin and lambda-cyhalothrin, which are primarily used as barrier applications. Now, barrier applications are not directly applied to water. They are applied to non-flowering vegetation and non-water surfaces where mosquitoes rest upon. And barrier applications are most effective when spread to the outer edges of the vegetation. DPR's 2012 summary of the pesticide use data report that public health use of deltamethrin and nalmefenacin are 0.17% and 0.009%. So real minimal use of it. And the State Water Board doesn't expect any significant increases in these.
So before we go into detail on each of the comments, is the board members comfortable with the comments. You have them in your package. Given our time constraint, I'm wondering if you'd prefer that there are any questions on this or go directly to the commenters at this point.
Actually turned it off. My inclination, I want to understand it. I read the comments and responses. It would be good to go to the actual comments and then we can zero in. I think that might be the best
Okay,
use of
so-
time. So that's a good suggestion. If that all right with everyone? All right. I have 2 cards. First I have, hopefully that's okay with you guys.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay. But first card is from Gary Goodman from the MVCAC.
Good morning. Well, good afternoon, I guess. On behalf of MVCAC, my name is Gary Goodman, and I've been heading the MPDS Coalition for MVCAC, which represents over 60 mosquito control districts throughout the state of California. And we've worked very closely with the state board staff to try to help develop this permit as the course of the season has gone on. We are recognized by CDPR as IPM innovators. In fact, MVCAC has won a number of awards for being IPM innovators by California Department of Public Health or Public Pesticide Registration, as well as some individual districts have done some for their public outreach and other IPM factors. And so we definitely recognize the use of trying to implement IPM to make sure that we're reducing pesticide use in our control of mosquitoes and the protection of public health. I think it is stated in some of the comments, public health applications of pesticides account for less than 1% of all reported pesticide use in the state of California. And I think, as Gil mentioned, larvicides are the majority of that. So considering the amount of pesticides that are actually being used, we are very good stewards of the environment and trying to reduce the amount of pesticide load from vector applications. And so some of the concerns that are not necessarily concerns that we have, but we definitely support the amendments that are here. One of the concerns that we've had over the past few years is that we have very limited products that are available to us for vector control, and some of the manufacturers try to tweak the formulas to be able to have new products available. And so some of those same products are just small changes to already existing products. And so, but the current permit has had the specific product that was done. So if a new product becomes available, it wasn't available for us to use in vector control here in California. And so that was becoming a hindrance because we want to make sure that we're using the appropriate product moving forward to help protect public health as a whole. And so this amendment really will help us be able to push some of the manufacturers to help tweak things to make sure that our products are the best available used for protection of public health moving forward. The 2 products that are actually being proposed to be added are deltamethrin and lime-disalhalthrin. And as it was mentioned, these are really barrier sprays. And the issue isn't necessarily that they're applied to water, but as an example, in the Coachella Valley in the middle of summer where we still have mosquitoes, there's not a lot of water in Coachella Valley. And some of this vegetation actually grows what we would be considered into a water of the U.S., a low-level water. So it's a wash in the wintertime that has water in it that would be considered a water of the U.S. In the summertime, it's dry, and yet there's vegetation. That's where mosquitoes are resting. So it would be an application of these particular products on that type of vegetation, and we want to be able to make that application and then report it as such. So even though there's not a direct impact to water quality per se from that particular application because there's no water there, it's still, in terms of its definition, still a water of the U.S., and we want to make sure that we're complying and reporting all of those things appropriately to the state board so they can track that. And so those are the 2 products that are being added to this. We support those products because it allows us a little bit more flexibility in making sure that we're choosing the appropriate product necessary for the situation at hand to help protect public health. And obviously, if there were any new products or new active ingredients that were being produced by any manufacturers, that we would fully expect CDPR and the state board to fully vet those to make sure that there's no impacts to water quality moving forward. We would work with them on how it would be used and those types of things, and then possibly that would have to go to another board action to help add that particular active ingredient there. So there's still quite a bit of flexibility in terms of new products that are moving forward, but this particular amendment gives us the flexibility to have already existing registered products for mosquito control to be able to use the appropriate one as consistent with our IPM methodology.
Thank you.
Great.
All right.
And
Question?
what about using these products, these larvicide products, in water of the state that doesn't have any water in it. So is that okay?
Yeah, we have no problem with that.
Does that have to do with its half-life, that type of thing, its fate and transport? Because it's not conservative, like if you did DDT, it would
No.
stick around.
I would also remind you that this permit allows them to apply to waters of the state.
Right,
Correct.
right.
Yeah, so,
They were just talking about what the primary use was.
So
Okay.
we're comfortable on the fate and transport of these pesticides.
Yes.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Next, we have Lori Fono from BACWA.
Hi, I know everybody's dying to get out of here, so I'll try to be briefer than the
Your
2
time,
pages
go
of
ahead.
comments I brought. But BACWA appreciates the opportunity to comment, and we also appreciate staff's close attention to our comments and are satisfied with most of the responses. We just wanted to call attention to one specific one. It's number 4 in the response to comments, and it pertains to receiving water monitoring. So prior to March 12, 2014, the monitoring reporting program included water quality sampling within 24 hours of application after each event, followed by a second sampling event within 1 week of project completion. But in 4 months ago, in Executive Order 2014-0038 that was mentioned earlier, it eliminated all pesticide chemical monitoring in the receiving water. And so the permit does include new triggers, but it means that the triggers will never be exceeded because there's no monitoring for the pesticide concentrations in the water body to which they're being applied. So in the response to comments, the State Water Board staff said that they would review all pesticides newly registered with DPR for the purpose of vector control. If the product contains constituents that can potentially cause water quality impacts, staff will recommend Water Code Section 13383 requiring vector control agencies to conduct monitoring for the constituents of concern. If discharge or monitoring is required, the triggers will be used to determine if surface water quality impact is occurring. But there isn't any mechanism in the permit or in the response to comments described for how State Water Board staff will identify constituents of concern. And the issuance of a 13383 letter seems like an unreasonable and unnecessary barrier to what should be routine monitoring to ensure protection of our water bodies against toxicity. So this permit isn't what is affecting the removal of the monitoring requirements, but that in combination with the significant changes to the general permit appear to limit the permit's effectiveness in protecting water quality. So in response to comment number 1 that was put up before, State Water Board staff said that they and MVCAC funded a 2012 study to determine the impacts of vector control applications on surface water quality. And then based on the study, the State Water Board's Deputy Director of Water Quality determined that the use of vector control applications do not significantly affect surface water quality or impact beneficial uses. So this is a pretty sweeping conclusion that's used to justify a considerable weakening of water quality protections. But the study wasn't part of the documentation of the permits. We've gathered indirectly that it was a monitoring study that was conducted by UC Davis and documented in a recently published paper by Phillips and his colleagues. And we submitted a copy of the paper with our comments. And we respectfully disagree with the staff interpretation of the study, which found that some mosquito control applications caused aquatic toxicity and that the toxicity was linked to a degradate of one of the already approved pesticides, NAILID. The paper also documents exceedances of the monitoring triggers listed in the permit for several other pesticides. So BACWA members and other wastewater dischargers convey wastewater containing some pollutants which are subject to strict effluent limitations and stringent monitoring and reporting requirements. This is in addition to the toxicity plan that's going to be regulating our discharges. And vector control providers apply full-strength pesticides directly to water bodies, and yet the permit to regulate their water quality impacts excludes water quality monitoring, and instead rely on numeric triggers in the receiving water bodies that will never be demonstrated since there's no required monitoring. So that was more long-winded than I had intended. But our ask is that the state board modify the permit to require receiving water monitoring, and based on available scientific data at a minimum, the monitoring should be required for the newly added pesticides, dichlorvos, which is the nail-lead breakdown product that was linked to toxicity in the study that was cited by staff, and then malathion, permethrin, and edofenprox, and other pesticides where the State Water Board study found monitoring trigger exceedances. And
No, thank
But-
you. Now I
but,
wanna ask a question.
Aren't you saying that it's not being applied to water?
No, 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 no. This is application of pesticides to water to control vectors. That's what this permit is all about. And yes, when you apply pesticides to water, you get toxicity. Because that's what it is. That's what we do with it. So there
Right.
will be toxicity. What we looked at was there persistent, long-term or widespread toxicity. You will have toxicity in the area that you apply it. We
Right.
recognize that. What we found is that the monitoring that we were conducting with the permit and along with the toxicity testing that we did under the special study, were not providing us with any additional information beyond the fact that you have this limited area of toxicity,
Limited area and limited duration.
limited duration.
And so, I understand where the concern is coming from Bakwa because they have a tight permit, but if you weren't finding long-term duration of that toxicity, how would it affect these guys? How likely to affect these guys?
It's not.
I didn't think so, but
But it seems unfair, and I think that's the issue.
well, it's unfair in terms of the disparate monitoring requirements, but also when a water body gets listed for toxicity, we are impacted.
when it gets listed for toxicity.
Yes.
But this
We do
isn't,
not
this
see
doesn't have the
toxicity.
long-term what he's saying is these applications may have short-term, short geographic area toxicity to accomplish their purposes, but they weren't finding long-term toxicity, which then wouldn't lead to an impairment finding, likely.
So that is the staff's interpretation of the report that was not shared with us, that we read some, a study that was recently published based on what we gather was the report that they rely on, and some of our experts disagree with that conclusion.
I'm sorry, it wasn't part of what we prepared for this because it was done back in January under the direction of Vicky's signature. I can get Karen Larson to give you a briefing on the results of that.
Well, why don't we just
Okay.
set up, I don't know, it's perfectly appropriate for you all to raise the issue in the context of this permit. I don't think we can resolve it in the context of this permit, and I just want to have a conversation so we understand it and they have a chance to talk with us about it.
Just one additional comment. My recollection is there's a national permit that was prepared by US EPA, and it also doesn't include any monitoring, chemical monitoring, for the reason that, after all, we're spraying the material as a poison to kill things in the water body, and so to follow up right behind with the test to see whether or not it kills things in the water body seems
Right, but you're
unnecessary.
trying to look at, in choosing which chemicals to allow, obviously, we're trying to look for ones that may do that job with fewer long-lasting effects in the water body, because that you would want to test for. I mean, that's how we're making our decision about whether there's to add something or not, right?
Sure, but that's work that has to be done up front to decide whether or not these are appropriate for this particular use. It doesn't seem like walking up behind it to analyze for what we know is going to happen.
Right.
You know,
No,
it's
I do understand that.
problematic,
I do think there needs to be probably a conversation with BACWA folks and you all, and maybe let one of us join the conversation. Is that,
I'd be happy to set that up.
I think that's important. And then one of us figure out who should just come to. That's, at least that's my suggestion. I don't know what the board's. All right.
I also want to add that before Deputy Director Vicki Whitney amended the monitoring reporting program, we posted it for a 30-day comment period, and we only got one timely comment letter regarding the change in the MRP,
All right.
and the comments pertained mostly to local application in the LA region, and specifically for larvicide applications, which EPA has deemed to be very less toxic. In fact, the previous monitoring program required monitoring for only one larvicide, and it's an organophosphate, Temifos. The other larvicides were not required to be monitored. So we, based on the comment letter that we received, we proceeded, or the deputy director proceeded in amending the monitoring program.
All right.
Okay. We look forward to hearing from you.
And I move adoption of this permit. And I believe there's a change sheet. So let's include the change sheet.
I will second.
All right. Any further discussion?
I just think it was good to get the input from regional board staff. I thought that was a big catch, actually, that 6 of the 8 that were proposed were then screened out, and when we came down to 2 ingredients. So I think everybody was doing their job. You know, I want to appreciate state board staff, regional board staff, and stakeholders in pointing those possible problems out, because we were just talking about those chemicals in the last TMDL, you know, bifenthrin and everything. So that was a big deal, and good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will reconvene at. Oh, did we vote? Oh, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay, it carries. Sorry. Ms. Townsend, can you put up on the board and online that people know we'll reconvene at 1 to discuss the stormwater strategy and anticipate rejoining item number 5 from yesterday at, is it item 5? Yeah, at, we'll try to shoot for 1:30. Okay. Ha. Oh, yeah. I don't know. It depends on what these guys give us. I haven't seen what they're going to, what I missed. It should, depends on how good a job they do. Well, see, so now you get an hour, right, before you have to.
He brought us lunch today.
He didn't trust us.
go into it, I make all those changes and whatever, make sure it's all okay. I go out of that document, okay? But if I'm posting it, now I haven't posted, I don't, at this point now, I don't take it out, because typically on any board meeting item, it's the agenda language, or agenda item, I will go to ECM, do it, but I have to save it into my files, because I have to PDF it and send it to web support, can't do it that way, so.
It remains there in ECM. You edited
I edited in ECM, so that the last version is the version that